President George Williams, President Howard White, to the Executive Director of the Alumni Federation, Mr. Donald Wade, Chancellor Agnew-Hotry, Vice Presidents, Vice Chancellors, Deans, Directors, and Chairpersons, faculty, staff, students, alumni, friends of Southern University all. We've heard glorious and joyful sounds come to us this morning from this band and from the choir. And we wanted them to be here because our message to you this morning, while perhaps having some elements of things that trouble us, is not intended to be a message of gloom, but rather a message to say to all of us Southernites, hold your heads high and walk in the path of righteousness, because you have a mission before you in terms of educating thousands of young people of Louisiana and of this nation. And we cannot afford to let our guard down, nor can we afford to speak of gloom when there is so much opportunity waiting for us and for the young people that we serve. As we gather here this morning, America faces a myriad of problems: economic deficits, the rampant distribution and use of drugs illegally, rising medical costs, an aging population and appropriate housing and other care for that population, crises in other nations that severely impact America or its allies, and yes, racism, institutional or otherwise, still abides in and amongst us and remains a thorn in the side of nations everywhere. Who will address these problems and how? Where will the scientists who will find a cure for AIDS or better prevention and treatment of hypertension come from? Who will give us understanding of and possible solutions for homelessness, for the pervasiveness and cruelty of poverty? Who will teach our children and their children in later years? Will these persons come from among you and from among our students and their peers? Will they come from Southern University? In June of 1987, U.S. News and World Report spoke to the question of why fewer blacks are graduating from college these days. The magazine reported that from 1979 to 1985, the number of blacks getting college diplomas declined about 6%, while the number of whites receiving bachelor's degrees remained steady. Blacks have lost ground at nearly every level of higher education, even though more blacks than ever graduating from high school, and their average college entrance exam scores have come closer to those of whites in the last decade. We recall that the Great Society programs of the 1960s and early 70s produced marked improvement among black children in poor neighborhoods and reading test scores through such programs as Title I, Head Start, and food programs. And the federal financial programs in the 1970s increased black enrollment in colleges from 10 to 30%. Yet over the past several years, the decline has been significant. Now, one of the reasons is lack of money. A decade ago, most black students who needed money for school could get government grants to cover approximately 75% of their college costs. Now, most financial aid is in the form of loans, and grants cover only about 45% of the cost nationally. But there are other reasons as well. Blacks are experiencing backlash against affirmative action from white students and professors, in addition to money shortages. They are faced with hostile students and faculty who feel that academic standards have been compromised to let blacks in. They hear it in class from the very teacher who is supposed to be inspiring students to greater heights. They hear it from the fellow student who, under more satisfactory circumstances, would befriend and lend support. Thus, the black student ends up feeling estranged and not belonging, and often drops out. And there are those who still wonder why there are needs for black colleges. There are still those who wonder why we must have a Southern university. There are about 270,000 black students enrolled in historically black colleges and universities. And a graduate from one of these colleges and universities, such as Southern University, will join some 1 million alumni of historically black colleges and universities. More than 80% of all black college graduates finish one of these institutions, and that includes most black lawyers, most black physicians, most black PhDs, most black officers in the American Armed Services, and a majority of the country's black executives, federal judges, including the first black Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall. And it includes the vast majority of what we are losing now, all black secondary teachers in this country. It isn't that separatism has been and is the major driving force of black colleges. We know differently. To African Americans, education has always been the key to better jobs and financial security. Black colleges were established to meet this need, for at one time, as we know, it was a crime to teach a black man to read or to write. Last year, Southern University graduated more blacks than the combined output of blacks graduating from Harvard, Notre Dame, and the Big Ten schools. And last year, almost 2/3 of all blacks receiving undergraduate degrees in the state of Louisiana came from just 4 predominantly black institutions to 3 campuses of Southern University and Grambling State University. Those who would ignore these statistics, those who would deny the rightful place of a Southern University in higher education in Louisiana, obviously don't understand the contributions that this university has made to the education of blacks, or they don't understand, or they ignore the institutional racism that is still prevalent in many of our predominantly white institutions. And all you have to do is to pick up a paper and you read about Smith College, the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, so-called liberal universities across this nation are experiencing incidents of racism at an alarming rate. It's an issue that this nation either refuses to address or wishes to put behind it or put it out of sight. But you must understand that there may be other reasons as well. You see, there are 2 institutions that give to us as black people some power in determining our own destiny and in helping to shape public policy. Those institutions are the black church, which nobody's going to mess with, and black institutions of higher education. Now, the latter is what folk are focusing their attention on, particularly in the public sector, because they recognize that if we let them, that they can mess with. But we've got a strong message today, don't we? We're Southernites holding our heads up high, and we don't intend to let anybody mess with us. Now let me tell you why. I see two of our prestigious elected officials out here, Mr. Frank Middleton and Senator Cleo Fierce. How good of you to come to join us today. Let me tell you, the face of America is changing. It's getting darker, browner, blacker. Over the next 13 years, blacks, Hispanics, and other minorities will make up a large share of the labor force. And let me tell you what that labor force is going to look like. You're going to have those up here making all the money, not many in between, and those down here making the lower wages. Now, guess where folks want you to be? But you aren't going to be there, and we're going to make sure that enough of us are proportionally up here making it big in the economic recovery of America. We've made lots of gains in the political stream. We've made lots of gains in other professions, but we still have to make it in the economic world. And you know, when you start talking about money, somehow things just don't even out, do they? We'll talk about this a little bit later, but just as an instance of that money we're talking about, the state of Louisiana claimed that it could not support the consent decree. During the 6 years it was in effect, said it wouldn't have made any difference. State went broke. Some $72 million or so dollars were supposed to come to Southern University for capital outlay. We got $14 million. Guess how much the state spent on capital outlay during that 6-year period? If I'm correct, Senator, it was about $5 billion. And about $1.3 billion of that was in cash, not bond sales. What did we get? 14 million out of 5 billion. Don't believe all that you read and don't believe all that you hear. Sometimes people deliberately put out stuff to you so as to mislead the public. The consent decree did not work because it was not funded properly, was not given a chance. But where it was funded, in the few instances, it's working, and it has worked, and it can work. The prospect that minorities will make up a large portion of the workforce ought to be a great opportunity for us, and it can be. But given the historic patterns of behavior of employers, you know, they might be expected to bid up wages of the relatively small numbers of white labor force interests, make substitutions in many service occupations, or move job sites to other parts of the country or out of the country. It ought to give us opportunity, and it can, but we have to be watchful. Because there will be changes, you see, in the occupational structure by the year 2000. Of all the new jobs that will be created over the next few years, more than half will require some education beyond high school, and almost a third will be filled by college graduates. Today, only 22% of all occupations require a college education. Occupations in the natural, computer, and mathematical sciences are growing at the rate of 68%. helpers and laborers will grow at a rate of 5%. Remember what I said earlier about that bottom stack? There's nothing wrong with being in that bottom stack if that's where we can perform our best. But let me tell you, all of us don't need to be there. Some of us ought to be spread out among the other levels in that economic workforce. The forces that are shaping this economy will make it increasingly difficult for young Americans without educational training to succeed in the job market. Many workers will need advanced skills just to have access to useful job training. In other words, you aren't going to be able to even be trained properly for a job unless you have proper skills. The good jobs of the future will belong to those who have skills and will enable them to be productive in a high-skilled service and technological economy. About 100 years ago, high school education was thought to be superfluous for factory workers, and a college degree was the mark of an academician or lawyer. That's no longer the case and will not be the case. Education will be the primary system by which the human capital of this nation is to be preserved and to be increased. The human capital. We mention these things because they serve as a backdrop for a larger argument that we make. And that is that if we don't succeed in educating our young people properly today, then they don't stand a chance in that job market of the future. What does it mean for us to educate properly today? Well, I heard Dr. Johnson mention something or refer to a booklet called Involvement in Learning last night at the honors program. And I recall that having read that booklet some time ago, how appropriate it was then and how appropriate it still is, because you see, research tells us that student involvement, how much time, energy, and effort students devote to the learning process, is a key standard by which we can measure and predict success and excellence. Another is high expectations. What we expect our students to gain, the educational outcomes sought by students and by institutions. And then the third is assessment and feedback. The use of assessment information to redirect effort is an essential ingredient in effective learning and is a powerful tool for involvement in learning. Student involvement, high expectations, assessment, and feedback. We mention those because students, in this, my first address to you, I issue a clarion call, a call to you for excellence, a demand of you for excellence, and I come to tell you that we will settle for no less. I come to tell instructors and staff members as well, we will not settle for any less than the best that you can give to all of our students in and out of the classroom. Because I have just said to you, I have just cited to you statistics that say if we aren't ready, we aren't going anywhere, and we want to go somewhere, we want to get there, we want to be at the top. As Southernites, we can't settle for any less. Now we know that the challenges facing us are not minor, but our principal aim must be focused on this student graduate of Southern University. That graduate must be well versed in the subject matter of his or her choosing, must be able to communicate effectively in writing and verbally, And you aren't going to teach that in just 1 or 2 courses in the freshman curriculum. It's got to be done from the freshman year to the time that student leaves this institution. The student must be conscious of the mores and practices of his profession and indeed of society as a whole. But the Southern graduate has to be more. That graduate has to be a person of compassion, has to be a person who recognizes and believes in the axiom, I am my brother's keeper, and as I rise to the top, I will take somebody with me. I will not go alone. That's the Southern graduate. As I said to the honors group last night, the thing that most visitors from accreditation teams are amazed about is the level of commitment of faculty and students. They don't believe it. They say your students actually help each other. Not surprising to me, but then I'm a Southernite. Shouldn't be surprising to you because you're Southernites too, but it surprises them that though we have little, we can do so much with that little. Though we have little, we share with one another. And though we complain and now and then we say what we aren't going to do, what we will do or will not do, but in the end, we do it because we believe in our mission. But now there is no shortcut to achieving the kind of quality we are talking about. There must be rigor in both teaching and in learning. We have to demand the very best from all. But when able and committed faculty set and maintain high standards, they challenge students to develop the ability that have always marked an educated person, those factors we talked about earlier. Students must be able to communicate. They've got to know basic mathematics. They've got to be able to think logically. They've got to have the capacity for learning, the capability to make sound and critical judgments. Because you see, we are in an age of information explosion. There is so much knowledge that we have to be able to process it in an efficient way. That's a new kind of skill that was not required 20 years ago, but it is necessary as the 3 R's are in today's and in tomorrow's society. But we only learn and develop such skills through strenuous and monitored practice throughout the curriculum. There's no way to avoid it throughout the curriculum. We've got to teach critical thinking. We've got to teach writing. We've got to teach reading skills throughout the curriculum. And we have not succeeded in doing that as we ought to. We have to admit where we failed as well. Dr. Netterville joins us today. We're so glad to have him here. The 21st century is going to be exciting, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be exciting. Full of opportunity, but not without risk for us. We'll talk about that risk in just a moment. Not without risk. Much will depend on how we can turn around the current climate in America and recultivate a sense of moral indignation and intolerance for racism. We've got to do that. This change alone will allow historically black colleges and universities to meet their challenges from a strengthened will. But listen, we cannot sit and wait for the country's mood to change. We can't afford to sit and wait. The most important challenge for the present may well be how successful we can muster support for a local and national agenda which will support public policy that is itself supportive of real and tangible educational opportunities for blacks. And historically, black colleges and universities can be no less than full partners in helping to shape that agenda and to formulate public policy in matters of concern to blacks. We haven't been about the business of doing enough of that. We have to get out and help to shape that public policy more and more. And you say, oh, but you keep asking us to do more and more. And yeah, in a minute, I'm going to ask you to do some more. I'm going to ask you because I know that you believe in this mission, the mission of this university, as much as I do. I know that the faculty and staff persons here believe in these students as much as I do. And I know that these students have got to believe in themselves as much as we believe in them. Let me turn for a moment to talk about some things of a more local issue now. I want to talk a little bit about some housekeeping things here. Pete, glad to see you stayed over for a while to be with us. Pete McCall is one of our cluster members and avid supporters of Southern University from Procter & Gamble. And he brought us a check yesterday and stayed over to be with us, and some of you freshmen may have heard him already, to share his talents as well. Pete's a Southernite. Listen, I said earlier we don't want to preach a message of doom, but I've got to be truthful with you. Things aren't going to get better fast. It's going to take some time, not as much time as some of you think, but it's going to take a little bit of time. I can't promise the absence of lines this registration or the absence of problems. Here's what I can promise you. I can promise you courtesy. I can promise you service with a smile. I can promise you professionalism, and I can promise you that when you walk into this arena, you will not see paper and dirt in the corners or in the stairwell. I can promise you that. I cannot promise a new building soon to relieve the overcrowdedness, but I can promise cleanliness, and I can promise pride in what is ours. What is ours. We've already spoken to Dr. Yates and to Mr. Cunningham and to Mr. White here. They're about to get together a clean-up campaign to make this campus look like it ought to look. Students and faculty and staff all joining hands together. We've got to do that. Pride in what we have, what is ours. Somebody gave me a list of themes. Say, you got to have a slogan or a theme or something. I said, all right, and gave me a list of what have you. I think it was Dr. Yates. Let's say, here's one we would like. Something that said new commitment, new vision. Let's see, I wrote it down somewhere here, Marvin, for you. Southern University, new directions and new commitments. I said, well, that's harmless. I mean, who's going to object to new directions and new commitments? You know, it's like objecting to mother and apple pie. But when I thought about it, I said, gee, you know, it does have a nice ring and it can have some meaning. It's up to us to put the meaning behind the words new directions and new commitments. We can have that. We will have it. It's necessary enough in order for us to keep believing in ourselves. I cannot promise to you that you're going to have all the things that you need. As a matter of fact, I can promise only the worst of times financially for a while. As you know, this campus is in a state of financial emergency because it suffered over $5 million in cuts proportionally more than any other institution in this state. And somebody thought we were going to roll over and die, Donald, but we did not, and we will not. Difficult? Yes. Because here's what it means. It means that on tomorrow we must go to the board with a balanced budget, and the only way to get it is to have some persons not return to us for employment after January 1. The only way to do it is to have a salary cut of unclassified employees at a certain level. And the only way to do it is to reduce expenditures to the bare bones and all the other things that we need. That's the only way we can do it, because that cut at this particular time really amounts to just about a 25% cut, and that's pretty tough to take without some drastic measures applied. The system has not declared a state of financial emergency, but everybody who works for the president in the system will voluntarily take the same pay cut proportionally that anybody else does, or those persons won't be looking at the president next year either. So we will share the burden at the systems level. We will share the burden as much as we can. It's not much in terms of money. It's not much in terms of what comes back to this campus, but it is a signal that all of us are going to suffer together. And someday when we wake up to that great morning, we're all going to laugh together as well and rejoice. We're going to do it together. But because of these, I want to make a special appeal to those of you who are sitting here. I'm going to be bold enough to ask, and I've asked Mr. Wade to sit here today because we've already written the letter that's going to be mailed no later than tomorrow, asking each of the alumni whose address we have, and we don't have all addresses. If you know somebody whose address we don't have, get it to us. We're going to ask each one of them to send back to us by December 31st a $200 check, a money order. Now, among 80 or 85,000 graduates, don't you think we can find at least 5,000 who are going to be willing to give us $200? I think so. I think so. And when we get that money, we're going to use it as we get it to reduce the impact on our instructional program, to put teachers back into the classroom, to offer the courses we need to offer, to reduce the salary cuts of our employees at certain levels. We're going to use it to offset that. And I just believe, Donald, that we're going to have $1.5 million in here by December 31st. I believe that. We've got a $5.1 million deficit, so it won't get us out of the red now. What it will do is to help us to restore some integrity to our academic programs, but it will mean more than that. It will say to this land, say to this state, say to this nation, we care and we are willing to help ourselves first before we ask help for anybody else. We want to do that. Now I'm going to make an appeal to faculty and staff that if you're asked to teach an overload, take it without pay. To staff persons, if you're asked to work overtime, work it without pay. And as you do so, remember those who will not be with us at all in January. But above all, remember those whom we serve. Remember these young people so that we can give, in spite of hard times, the best service and education we can to them. Yes, Dean, Mr. Vice Chancellor, and others who are capable of teaching a course, and if we can work it in, Dr. DeConje, I'll teach a course in mathematics. We're asking administrators teach a course too for free. Belair has a master's degree in English. Give him an English course to teach as well. There are others among us who have skills and have training that we can use. And now I see some of our very illustrious retirees sitting out there. Now, I'm not, yeah. People who have contributed so much to this university and still do in many cases. We're going to ask you to come back and join us. If you were teachers, come back and teach a course for us in your area. If you work in the library, come back and work in the library with us. If you help to clean our buildings, come back and give us an hour or two a day to keep our buildings clean. Come back to help us in our time of need. And you will be given so much of yourselves to the students whom we serve. And we appeal to the community at large. If you're here today or if you're listening, you may not be a graduate of this institution, but I know that you support us. Send us your check too. We'll put it in the kitty with the rest. I have a final appeal to the people who matter the most in all of this, to our students. My appeal to you is to be the very best that you can be, to study, to use the library. Now, I got to say something to the teachers about that. Now, when I go over and see an empty library, a half-empty library, night after night, evening after evening, day after day, except when test time comes around, where are your reading lists? What are you requiring of your students? You see, your teaching ought to be so that they will have to go to that library or else they won't be back in your classroom. Students, demand the very best from us. Demand the very best from your teachers, from your staff, from administrators. Demand that we give to you what you ought to have, the best in education possible. If you demand it, you'll get it. I'm not talking about demanding that you be let off the hook for missing an exam because you decided to do something else. I'm not talking about demanding that you get out of somebody's class because you don't like the kind of work that that teacher gives. I'm talking about demanding that each teacher fills you up with so much work that you don't have time to hang out in the student center, that you don't have time to worry about whether or not you're going to get that special kind of designer jeans or whatever to wear. You don't have time to worry about that because you're on your way. You're on your way to being that great Southernite graduate that we talked about earlier. And the only way to get there is through hard work and study, dedication and concentration, and believing in yourself and believing in us and demanding, as we demand of you, the very best that we all can be. Got to do it. I haven't said much about the higher education desegregation plan because I have been advised by attorney that since the matter is in court to refer all questions and comments to him. I will say to you that there is a status conference to be held with the judges in New Orleans on this coming Tuesday, November 22nd, and I don't know what will happen except that I'll be there. But I want to tell you something that I've told very few people outside the confines of a small group or what have you, and it's something that was said in the last status conference that I attended with these three judges. One of the judges asked our attorney, if you had a graduate from the University of New Orleans and a graduate from Southern University at New Orleans, which would you choose? So the attorney said, well, I'd have to look at each of them individually to see what their qualifications are. And the judge said, no, you aren't telling the truth. You know you would pick the one from the University of New Orleans. And I had to stand at that moment and take exception to that judge and said, I beg your pardon, sir. I beg your pardon, but your assumptions are incorrect. It is not automatically assumed that the job goes to the UNO graduate, but there is a perception out there, and you have to know it. There's a perception out there that education from black institutions is inferior. This in spite of the fact that the vast majority, almost 80% of all blacks with PhDs got them from white institutions, but came from historically black institutions. Am I telling the truth? Don't you know that fact? And yet they tell us that we can't make it. Some of us dare to believe that stuff. You know, we believe it. Hold your heads high, Southernites. Check facts out. Just don't swallow the brainwashing kind of garbage that will make you feel inferior. You are not. But we do have to fight the perceptions. And I think the best way to do that is to show, to demonstrate quantitatively what we do and how well we do it. We haven't done enough of that. And so one of the things that we're going to plan for this semester is a comprehensive assessment center that will not only involve just testing of our students, but will also involve the proper feedback that we talked about earlier with the involvement in learning things, how to correct deficiencies, but will also extend to faculty and staff and to administrators, even to the extent of how well the chancellor and the president administer the budgets in terms of the mission of this institution. It ought to have an important place in this university, that kind of assessment. And let me tell you, if we don't do it, somebody's going to force us to do it anyway. Legislatures all over this country are imposing assessment plans and standards on colleges and universities, just as they have done in many instances for grades K through 12. I think we can do it ourselves. We can assess, we can do our own plan, and I believe that we can follow through on it in such a way that we can demonstrate that's a signal that it's time to shut up and sit down, and I will in a moment. We have to document Professor Jewel Prestige's significant contribution to education in America. The lady almost single-handedly has caused to be produced more black PhDs in her discipline than anybody else, and she's from right here at Southern University. She's a Southernite. She's a Southernite. And we've got to talk about getting some chairs for people like these, some endowed chairs. We got people here who are worthy of sitting in endowed chairs right here. We don't have to necessarily bring somebody in we have people here who are distinguished enough to sit in endowed chairs. We're going to be as good as we want to be Southernites, and that's going to be pretty good. So where do we go from here? New directions, new commitments. Dr. Yates, yes, we've got to have them, and we're going to have them. We're going to spend the holidays working. We're going to work on some things to produce those new directions and those new plans and what have you. But I want to tell you about something that's been happening already. My heart was warmed by the fact that when I first got here, I was greeted by reports from a group of faculty members, and I won't dare call their names because I'm going to miss somebody, except that I know the president of the Faculty Senate was intimately involved, and as was Dr. Bob Ford. And there were several students who sat in my office one night to talk about their involvement in things that they saw for this university. And they presented to me briefings on a lot of work they had done researching various topics of importance to this university. And they gave suggestions and ideas. And we're going to begin working on them. They're anxious. They get back to us quickly. And I said I will. As soon as we deal with this financial emergency and the desegregation thing, we're going to begin some talks on a frequent basis with faculty and staff and students to lead into these new directions and these new commitments. But I appreciated that because this was a positive move. Here were people coming to me, not griping and bitching about what's wrong, but saying, look, we have identified some problem areas and here's what we can do about them together. I like that, I really did. I think it's good for all of us. This university enrolls students who are mostly first-generation college students. And nowhere can you see the benefits of their education here at Southern than on commencement day. When you're here and you watch their parents and their relatives beam with pride as they walk across the stage, and for many of them, it may be an instance of the first break in a cycle of poverty in their homes. That's a tremendous accomplishment. It's a tremendous role that we play in the state of Louisiana. Most of the students who come to us are in need of financial assistance. Unfortunately, we don't have all that many of them need. Many come from poor families. So while we serve people of all ethnic backgrounds, while we serve people of all social and economic strata, we also have a special place in our hearts for the poor, for the neglected. And I close with something, with words that I particularly like as I think about that vast majority of people out there who fit into that category. And children under the age of 15 fit into that category. The largest group of poor people in this country, children under the age of 15. This little poem is entitled, He Wishes for the Cloths of Heaven. Had I the heavens embroidered cloths, enwrought with golden and silver lights, the blue and the dim and the dark cloths of night and light and the half-light, I would spread the cloths under your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. Please tread softly. You tread on the dreams of Southernites everywhere. Thank you very much.